Alright, so I recently played through Metal Gear Solid for the first time, finally checking off the game on my shelf that's been on my backlog the longest. So got some gameplay here in the background of me starting the weapon missions and the VR missions, the standalone bonus game or whatever you want to call it. I already dove into a bit of my history with this game in the Growing Up Gaming series I did here, so I'm not going to dive into as much detail. The game pretty much came with my PlayStation, and the PlayStation was the first console I ever had, but I didn't really play it much. My experience with it almost reminds me of my experience with Zelda the Wind Waker. I played Wind Waker a bit more than this game, at least before going through that one all the way through too. And in both games, though, I would explore the first area quite a bit, in this case being the tank hangar, but would get stuck pretty quickly when moving to the next area. And then I would stop and, maybe I would pick it back up in a few months or years, and I would make it a little further. Then I would stop and we'd sort of rinse and repeat that whole process until now. I don't know where my record was exactly with how far I made it in the past. The first thing I knew 100% for sure that I experienced for the first time was the first fight against Gray Fox. So still most of the game was new to me. You may have noticed, but I've actually been playing it on DuckStation. And I was in the mood for a stealth game, hence why I was playing this to begin with. But at the same time, stealth tends to not be my favorite genre. And the thing that infuriates me the most sometimes with it is when you're, trying to set up an enemy. You make one little fuck up, and then, I don't know, I feel like you have to go through this whole process of hiding yourself again and then setting everything up all over again, repeating yourself. I feel like that's what sort of held me back with some of these games and made them less fun than they could have been for me. So DuckStation, have access to save states and rewind, which fixes that issue. And don't get me wrong, it's cheating, but I don't care. I had a lot more fun. I had so much fun, in fact, that after my first couple sessions, I began rethinking, I've got a bunch of Hitman games, and Thief is another stealth series I know I have on Steam and or GOG. Then I'm kind of sitting there thinking, should I pick up the old Xbox or PS2 version so I can have access to save states and rewind? I've played Splinter Cell Conviction before and didn't really like it too much. I mean, would save states and rewind have made that series more approachable too? I do have one of the Splinter Cell games too on original Xbox. It was the cheapest one that you can get to access the ability to soft mod your Xbox, so that's why I even had it to begin with, not even intending to really play it. It's still there though, but like I said, you made a really fun game when my first reaction after a couple sessions was to order Metal Gear Solid 2. I do have Snake Eater 3DS, and I do have and have played Revengeance, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, I just really wanted to be ready to go when I felt motivated to move forward in the series, which I don't imagine being a long time. Granted, I've said that before, and then, in the middle of a game or right before starting it, I'll get distracted, and I'll be saying years later, wow, I intended to play this game several years ago. So we'll see. I do want to play Metal Gear Solid 4 after 2, because I think 3 is supposed to be a prequel, and 4 is supposed to kind of continue going down, the timeline, or whatever you want to say. But right now you can only get it on PS3, and I don't have a PS3. Granted, when they released the latest collection, there's a lot of speculation on whether you can get ported to modern consoles in the near future, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it's not an absurdly long time before I'm able to play it, or maybe I'm having to adjust plans I would rather not adjust. Oh yeah, because I remember this VR mission. I think this is the first time you're going to start to see some heavy rewind and save states. I couldn't get the C4 controls down as well as I would have liked for some reason. I would forget that setting and triggering were two different buttons, especially since I didn't really use it much in the main campaign. There was also a weapon here I don't even remember from the main campaign. Maybe I never found it. It also kind of had to do with crawling past landmines to pick them up, which I didn't do at all, so I don't know if you had to do that to get it, or if it was hidden somewhere else. I forget what it was called, but it was essentially built around manipulating all the landmines in that. I guess I was wrong. I didn't rewind on that one as much as I thought. Maybe it was this one, or I'm thinking of another one, or just a general streak of rough consecutive levels or something, but yeah, I was even considering diving right into 2 right after 1, but I'll admit my one complaint with the game that sort of killed my momentum for that was some of the backtracking. Like I said, I'm not one to really like repeating myself, so I had to twice, once with the Sniper Wolf boss fight, although maybe I was just stupid with that one, because I went back and I needed the key I just got to go to unlock the sniper in the first area, but I don't know, could you have used the Nikita or something else to do that even? She may have been elevated though, so I don't know if that would have worked. And then after that, there's like another part in, pretty much towards the very end of the game where you need to manipulate different items and go back and forth twice, and like I said, that kind of killed the momentum. So I don't know, I felt kind of like the best way to go about things was just to play VR missions, since I wasn't sure where I would sort of fall there, maybe even initially saving it for later, and taking at least a little bit of a break before too. Sorry for the quick edit right here. I kind of thought of something after recording, being that there is a way to make backtracking and repeating yourself fun. One of my favorite games is Nier Automata, the original Nier 2, and they do a fantastic job with this. And I feel like Metal Gear is almost halfway there. The reason it worked well in Nier is because not only, like Metal Gear, do they advance the story in big ways, in my opinion, but the thing that Metal Gear is missing that Nier has is that they also find ways to sort of freshen up the gameplay with, a new character, ability, item, etc. So I don't know if Metal Gear ever, does stuff like that later on with that sort of thing, but it is something I could see working well if they do. I want to talk about Psycho Mantis, one of the most infamous parts of this game. I guess this is the point too where we started to dive into spoilers a bit, although I think a lot of people are really aware of the Psycho Mantis thing. But after that, I'm probably going to be diving into the story itself, so be careful if you don't want any of that. But it's kind of funny. So I actually wound up downloading a Castlevania Sympathy of the Night save just to get that one line. I've never owned the game, never had any interest in it. Had to even figure out, because I guess the way a lot of the emulators work is they'll have a different memory card for each game, so I had to learn how to shift it to a shared memory card and import that save in. And I would have done it with all the games, but when I went to get the next game, which was the one I was most familiar with, Suikoden, I might be mispronouncing that, but I couldn't really find it, and I figured I probably wasn't going to have any other luck with the other games, so I just stuck with Castlevania. And then the boss fight itself, so I knew you at some point had to switch your controller port to the second one. However, I think I sort of made my own fan fiction in my head on how that actually worked. And I was so convinced that that was the way it worked that the actual, indicator to switch to the second port completely went over my head. I always thought it was like a special attack or something where, halfway through the fight you kind of stop moving, or maybe your controls are, inverted, or, just something's funky. Not realizing from the very start you can't land a hit without being in that second controller port. So I just thought that was kind of funny. Probably not my favorite boss fight, though. I really liked the Vulcan Raven one. It was actually more of what I was expecting from a stealth game boss fight, at least the way I played it. That's one of the good parts about this game, is that there probably are loads of different strategies in that you can take with all the scenarios, but, particularly the boss fights in a lot of cases as well. Some a lot easier than others. You certainly have a lot of tools, and I can imagine people having, a fun time trying to, make it through certain areas with unoptimized tools and that as a challenge. As for the story itself, I don't know what happened, but for some reason I was already aware of some key aspects of Naomi's story. Not everything. I didn't know her connection to Gray Fox. What I want to say probably happened is somehow I found out there was a traitor in the group. So then I probably did a deeper dive into her at some point. But what's kind of funny about that even though too is I knew she was the traitor, but I thought she was going to die in this game. Not realizing that happened later in the series. I guess you go back to Shadow Moses, or it's at least referenced, or, something. So, I don't know. That was still sort of interesting with my limited and partially wrong, in a way, knowledge of that situation. Boy, that second disc and the last, so much of the game, that it's quite the ride for the story. A lot of fun twists that I necessarily didn't see coming, to where the one I knew about almost felt like more of a footnote even. The only thing with that, though, is I felt like the second disc was a lot more story and not as much gameplay as the first for late game. I mean, maybe it was also partially that last keycard section I mentioned earlier that sort of broke the good flow of gameplay and made late game not feel as good in that regard, but was still more than able to make it through. The one thing that really confused me, though, with everything was the whole Fox die part of the story, because the way I initially interpreted it was that Snake had the virus and was spreading it or triggering it within the people in the facility. But then I thought, wait, why isn't Meryl infected? So I guess it's only triggering if they already had it. But then why does it not affect a majority of people when Snake comes into contact with them? I read up a bit more on the wiki, but it didn't help that much. Something about Naomi programming a random number for Snake. I don't know if it was just for Snake, if it was for everyone, as to, when the virus would sort of kill them. And it is something that plays, a pretty big role with the death of Liquid Snake, which is, a big moment considering you thought you killed him like 2 or 3 times before that. I would have almost honestly rathered if they just kind of had him, stumbling and struggling to try to get the last shot there in the end after the Jeep wreck, with that, just kind of being finally when his body caved into everything he had went through right there. So it's like, I don't know, even though like I still can't really process the logic of that one in my head, the game offered, so many other things that did click with me and made sense that honestly I'm willing to overlook it and not let it get to me as much as it may have in other stories and that. But yeah, it's really good to finish a game like this though and kind of see for myself why this series and particular game are as loved as they are, and no longer, be left out in what is a really impactful big game in, just general gaming culture, I guess you can say.